Hello everyone, welcome back. So as we are discussing various set of question papers, in this question paper we will be discussing questions related to economic reform. Okay, so questions from economic reforms might be very relevant to your examination. So we will start with this discussion. Please pay attention and we'll also mark the correct answers along with the explanation. So coming to the first question, that is question number 205. Structural reforms in the context of historical shock therapy were aimed at nationalization of the economy, shedding taxation to boost individual and corporate income, greater push towards free markets, promoting communism and socialism. So coming to the discussion of this answer, see, the collapse of communism in Central Asia and East Europe was followed by a painful process of transition from an authoritarian socialist system to a democratic capitalist system. So this model of transition came to be known as the shock therapy. So part of it could be seen in how the economy was restructured after the breakdown that involved more freedom to markets and enterprise as shunning the red tape. Okay, so accordingly, with this explanation, our option number C is the correct answer. That is a greater push towards the free markets were emphasized. So we'll mark option number 3 as the correct answer. Moving to the next question, question number 206. As a country develops, it undergoes structural change. In the case of India, the structural change is peculiar with regards to its sectoral composition, especially with respect to the services sector. What is so peculiar about this structural change? A. Services sector has grown at a slower rate than any other sector of the economy. B. Traditionally, services sector growth is propelled by the manufacturing sector, but in India, agricultural sector has propelled services sector growth. Or C. The services sector contributes more to the GDP than agriculture and manufacturing, even though India is not a developed country. And option number D. Services sector has failed to generate additional employment despite high levels of growth in India. See, let's come to one by one, to the points discussing one by one. Usually with high development, the share of agricultural declines and the share of industry becomes dominant. At higher levels of development, what happens? The services sector contributes more to the GDP than the other two sectors, that is, than the agriculture and the industrial sector. In India, the share of agriculture in the GDP was more than 50%, as we could expect for a poor country. But at the end of the 1990s, the share of the service sector had decreased to more than 40%. More than that of agriculture or industry. Now, this happens generally in developed nations. So, this phenomena of growing share of the service sector was accelerated in the post-1991 period, and today it accounts for nearly 65% of our GDP. So, this is the peculiar pattern of Indian growth where services sector has accelerated without the rapid growth and saturation of the manufacturing sector. So C is correct and A is incorrect. Okay. So manufacturing and liberalization have fueled services sector inter alia. So B is incorrect. Okay. So it is manufactured. It is the manufacturing sector that has not generated additional gainful employment and not the services sector. So again, D is wrong. Okay. So accordingly, we have only C as the correct answer. Okay, so we will be marking C, option number C. Next, moving on to question number 207. Okay, so which of the following measures would come under the term structural adjustment in the economy? Cutting public subsidies, liberalization policy, tight monetary policy, and we have the correct codes given here, 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 3, all of the above, which will be the correct answer. See, for this question, let's come to the explanation. You can even explain with LPG, See, let me give you the explanation. The structural reforms in India are popularly known as the LPG reforms. Okay, so which include L for liberalization, P for privatization, and G for globalization. This is the LPG reform that I'm talking. They also involve reduction in subsidies and reduced role of the state in the economy. So going by this explanation, our option number A is the correct one, which says 1 and 2 only. That means cutting public subsidies and liberalization policy. So option number 1, A, which says 1 and 2 is the correct answer. Next, moving to 208. Structural reform measures have often been talked about in the economic surveys and other government policy documents. Such measures do not consist of reducing the role of state vis-a-vis private sector in the economy, checking supply side bottlenecks by infrastructure creation, cutting down investment spending by higher policy rates and promoting consumption spending, overhauling public fiscal management. So these are the four options that we have for question number 208, and we'll come to the explanation of this. Structural reforms address the fundamental weakness of an economy. Let's take an example. An economy might have too much state control. Structural reforms involve easing government regulation and promoting ease of doing business. Some other structural reforms which can be are attempting higher participation of private capital, Indian and foreign, increasing aggregate supply of the economy by addressing supply side issues, involving administration of subsidies, investment infrastructure, for example, addressing power sector woes in India, fiscal consolidation and financial inclusion. So such reforms improve macroeconomic performance and ensure sustainable economic growth. So going by this explanation, our option number C is the answer to this, cutting down investment spending by higher policy rates and promoting consumption spending. Okay. Moving on to the next question. These questions are from liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which I just now said, LPG. Okay, LPG. So we have question number 209. Washington Consensus refers to a set of economic reform prescriptions for developing countries, strategy to tackle organized terrorism in the Middle East, set of prescriptions for ecologically sustainable mining in erstwhile colonial African countries, planned by the UNFCCC to reverse climate change and save low-lying island nations. Okay, so Washington Consensus is the standard reform package that was promoted for crisis-racked developing countries by Washington, D.C. based institutions, the International Monetary Fund, which is the IMF, and the World Bank. So this reform was towards a strongly market-based approach, which includes economic opening with respect to both trade and investment, macroeconomic stabilization, also the expansion of market forces within domestic economy. So going by this, only option number A will be the appropriate answer, that is set of economic reforms prescriptions for the developing countries. Moving on to the next question, 210. India agreed to the conditionalities of World Bank and IMF and announced the new economic policy, which is the NEP 1991, to avert a balance of payment or BOP crisis, a situation of hyperinflation, in the economy, a situation of monetary depression in the economy, and ill-spread effect of the Asian financial crisis. So coming to the explanation of this question, in the year or in the period of 1980s, foreign exchange reserves declined to a level that was appropriately not adequate to finance imports for more than 2 weeks. It was not enough to pay the interest that needed to be paid to international lenders. Therefore, a balance of payment crisis was looming, to avert which India resorted to the help of the World Bank and IMF. Other objectives of this policy were to tackle high inflation, mismanagement of the economy, revive growth, etc. However, the most appropriate reason was to avert a balance of payment crisis or the BOP crisis. And the new economic policy, which is the NEP 1991, this policy aimed towards market-oriented economy and creating a more competitive environment. It involved removing the barriers to entry and growth of firms. It can broadly be classified into two groups, that is the stabilization measures and the structural reforms measures. So accordingly, we can mark option number A only as the correct answer. Okay, that is the balance of payment crisis. Next, moving on to question number 211. Which of the following has been peculiar or noteworthy to the Indian economic growth story? Services sector has always grown at a slower rate than any other sector of the economy. Agricultural sector has always employed the largest number of workers in the economy. Services sector contributes more to the GDP than agriculture and manufacturing, even though India is not an industrially developed country. We have to mark the correct codes: 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3, or 1 and 3. Okay. Now see, as a country develops, it undergoes structural changes. Usually with high development, the contribution of agricultural declines and the share of industry also increases. In case of developed economies, what happens? The share of service sector contributes more to the GDP than the other two sectors, that is the industrial and the primary, that is the agriculture. In case of India, the structural change is peculiar with regards to the sectoral composition, especially in the case of service sector. Service sector has grown much faster as compared to the sectors of the economy post-liberalization. Traditionally, services sector growth is propelled by manufacturing sector, but in India, services has overtaken manufacturing in terms of GDP, even though manufacturing has not been fully developed. However, the services sector contributes more to the GDP, that is over 60%, than agriculture, which is 14%, and manufacturing, even though India is not a developed country. Accordingly, our option number B is the answer that we can mark. Okay, that is 2 and 3 are the correct ones. Next, moving on to question 212. Government sometimes takes large policy measures such as structural reform policies. Which of the following measures can be included in it? Privatization, deregulation of several areas of the economy, focusing more on industries than agriculture. Again, we are given with codes 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 3, or all of the above. Basically, the structural reform policies involve long-term measures such as liberalization, privatization, and deregulation. They are aimed to improve the efficiency and competitiveness of the economy. Let's take an example. The 1991 reforms were one of the largest such measures that were undertaken in the economy. Even the new government is taking a large number of structural reform measures such as opening up sectors, FDI in defense, FDI insurance, that is to 49%, etc. So going by this, we have option number 1 and 2 to be correct, that is privatization and the deregulation of several areas of the economy. That is option number A is the correct answer, 1 and 2. Next, moving to 213. Okay, moving to question 213. The term second generation reforms is often heard in India in the context of economic restructurization, defense reorganization, border demarcation, decriminalization of politics. Okay, so we have 4 options here. Now, going by this, even though it's a generic term, it is used specifically for India's economic reforms. So the reforms undertaken in 1991 are termed as the first generation of reforms. Now, these reforms had pushed India to a high growth trajectory. The reforms opened the economy to foreign investments and introduced trade liberalization and tax reforms. Now, it marked an end to the license quota Raj. Okay. So, however, these reforms haven't been sufficient, and the second generation reforms have been demanded. So, they imply a wide opening of sectors and deeper structural reforms of the economy. Let's take an example: land reforms, including land acquisition, GST, FDI policy regime, deregulation of fuel prices, linking subsidies to Aadhaar and bank account, increasing de-investment, improving ease of doing business, that is bankruptcy laws and all these. Next, a big mineral allocation, bank sector reforms, etc., etc. Therefore, holistic reforms considering the economy wide picture are called second generation reforms, which not only liberate the economy but make it more competitive, stable, and sustainable. So accordingly, we will mark question number option number A as the correct answer, that is economic restructurization. Coming to question number 214. Which of the following arguments would most weaken the case for an economic policy of liberalization? Market alone would not be able to look after the welfare of the people, especially the disadvantaged section. It is important to protect the indigenous industries from the outside competition. Greater integration into the global market would be beneficial to the Indian economy. Okay. The argument in option A is more about the idea of a welfare state, right? A liberalized state too can look after the welfare needs of the citizens. Okay. Argument in B strengthens the case for liberalization. Okay. It's more complete and clearer than in option number B. It is self-explanatory as to why liberalization may not be taken into the economy. Okay. So going by this, we have discussed up till question number 214 in this video. In the next video, we will be coming up with the next set of questions. So I hope the questions were well understood also. So thank you for clearly understanding me and for patiently hearing me out. Thank you so much.